Hello, everyone. Welcome to Safe Spaces Pod. Today, we're going to be joined by Nate Hochman and Government. I'm excited to be back.
Yeah, dude, it's been too long almost. I feel like you were AFK for a while though. Where did you head?
Oh yeah, I went back to the East Coast, so that I was out a little bit and couldn't get on the podcast as much as I wanted. And Nate, welcome on.
What's up, dude? 1 sec. Let me microphone. Speaker.
Well, Nate, this is Government. Government is a former hallmate of mine in college, and now
former
just
Tiger.
Former Tiger as
What's up,
well.
man? Excellent.
I have a few things to say about that school, but I probably won't right now.
Well, we can. I don't know exactly what you guys what you guys want to get into, but I'm an open book, so I'm happy to talk about CC a lot if you guys want to. Yeah, I assume you have a pretty small audience right now, but are you who's watching this? Are you just sending it to your buddies, or are you not even doing that?
You want to take that away, Francisco?
Yeah, so we're taking care of the content right now. We are eventually going to start marketing it. I want to have a degree in hand before I do that. May even start showing the face in a few weeks, but waiting for the degree to get in hand to start marketing it. But our buddies tune in a little bit. We've had a bunch of people on, so a few people know about it. We've had some popular episodes, but other than that, we're kind of just trying to take care of the content and trying to get as many stories on our page as possible right now.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Go ahead.
Well, we kind of started this during a bender, so it was pretty egregious thing. The things that we were saying were pretty horrible.
They're all good ideas. Start.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, most of it was joking. We don't really mean a lot of things that we say, but we've shifted a little bit and made it more walk the line of being able to be canceled or not. So
yeah.
We've been.
Do you guys want me to not say stuff that's gonna would get you in trouble? I mean, obviously, I'm not racist or anything, so we don't talk about race and IQ or something. But I have pretty, I'm pretty socially conservative, so I have pretty spicy views on transgender issues, etc. And we can stay away from that if you want. I don't know.
No, we want to get into that stuff.
Okay, cool.
We're planning on talking about that.
Yeah, it was more of. We're waiting we want to receive a bachelor's degree. And then once we do that, we can conquer the world,
we're not posting these on Spotify yet. So Spotify is the easiest way to listen to podcasts and other types of media. And so we're taking away the accessibility factor and just having it on YouTube. So if someone really wants to listen to us, they can. We have a decent amount of content at this point. But once we graduate, we're going to put it on Spotify and try to make it more mainstream.
Sweet. So right now it's just test runs kind of to get your sea legs under you kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, but we're still posting them, and we're planning on posting these on Spotify eventually. As soon as the school that I go to tells me I've graduated, I'll post them. I'm just a little critical of the school, but I love the school too, deep down. But
do any of your buddies at the school know about that? Have you do your close friends know you're doing it see the episodes, or is it totally? It is. Okay, cool.
Yeah, our close friends come on. Our close friends actually do come and talk on here. I also have gotten a lot of people from home to come on, but they tune in a little bit. But again, it's just kind of a passion project at this point.
Yeah.
Are we live right now?
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, we can cut it whenever, or crop it whenever. But I think just we're in the low double digits right now.
Okay. Good.
You got to
with no marketing. That's good.
Yeah. So we could hop into it. So Nate, we wanted to start with where are you located right now?
I'm in the swamp in DC, the heart of the Imperial City. It's actually beautiful.
DC is actually, I think, the best city because of the skyscraper situation.
Yep, and I'm in one of the skyscrapers, which is pretty dope. So we've got a view of the Capitol up on our roof and rooftop pool. It's very bougie, yuppie. I'm in Navy Yard, which is the Republican neighborhood. Yeah. Have you? So you've hung out in DC?
Yeah, I'm basically in DC right now. And when
dope.
I think I'll be in Navy Yard. Mission is actually my favorite bar. So if any listeners in Navy Yard, go to Mission after a Nationals game.
That's right. Yeah. So I'm right next to the National. I probably shouldn't dox myself too much, but the Navy Yard is the Republican neighborhood. It's where all the young Republican staffers
because
live.
It's expensive.
Yeah, partially. Although Democratic staffers make just as much money, and Republican staffers also get. Can I cuss on this podcast?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. They just make jack shit. Like they don't like the Hill staffers at the lower levels are getting like poverty wages. But Mission is the Republican bar, which is hilarious because DC is such a blue city. But Mission is like where all the Republicans are. So you'll see like Republican congressmen there, like all the staffers there are Republicans. It's like this weird red enclave in like one of the deepest blue cities in America.
Yeah. So
Well, I'd just like to say one more thing about Mission. That kind of implies that Republicans really know how to like get down and party. Like Mission,
they do.
Francisco.
People sleep on like young Republicans. Like all the Republicans, there's sort of a difference between like conservative media types, like and like think tankers who are like all nerdy, and that's my end of the spectrum, and like the Hill staffers. But Republican Hill staffers, like it's basically like a big frat or sorority. Like, so all the kids there are like ex big state school frat and sorority kids. And it's just like the same culture. Like everyone in DC is a high functioning alcoholic, for better, for worse, which is kind of a red pill.
Yeah.
Everyone except for Donald Trump. Donald Trump.
That's right. Teetotaler.
Does Donnie T not drink?
No,
or nothing. Just Diet Coke.
What I'm actually trying to get on the sober wave because my brain would function so much better.
Yeah. That is one problem coming to DC is like, because alcoholism is just like the culture, like every social event is like drinking heavily, like people are constantly like, oh, let's go get drinks to like network or whatever. But like the networking includes just like getting hammered. So I'm like drinking more here than I drank ever in college, which is bad. And it's also just kind of, like I said, like a red pill, because it's like, I think a lot of Americans don't know that their country is run by a bunch of alcoholics, but it is. Like everyone here, including the congressmen, are all like just booze bags. Depressing. Yeah. So, although it's probably always been like that.
No, yeah, we like the drank a little bit on this pod, but we also know the drank is a double-edged sword. But no, one thing we're going to talk about in regards to DC was like the homelessness there. Do you see a lot of it?
So my neighborhood, again, is like a bougie, kind of like yuppie upscale. It used to be super sketchy a couple decades ago, but it's been like under crazy development. There's construction everywhere. So now it's like, it's very clean. Like it's actually like a very, very nice neighborhood. But other parts of DC, yeah, it's really bad. And we're like still pretty close to the projects. And as crime is spiking here, like it's spiking in like most American cities, the sort of violence from the really sketchy neighborhoods close to us is like, it's seeping closer and closer into our neighborhood. So there are like shootings every once in a while, like right outside my apartment now, which is sketchy, but it's also weird because like, I can't show you, but if you look outside, this is like a very upscale neighborhood, very clean streets. Like everyone here is sort of like, in positions of power in DC or whatever. And then they're just like, every once in a while, they're like gang shootings here now. It's very weird and kind of disturbing. But it's getting worse, not better.
Yeah, going off that. So how do you feel? Is it a little weird, the fact that you went from Colorado Springs, another place known for homelessness, to DC, the homeless capital of the world?
I guess it's consistency. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, which is even worse. So I guess I'm sort of immune to it a little bit because nothing's as bad as Portland. I did. Yeah.
I did not. Oh, okay. So I thought you were a Connecticut kid. So, okay, you grew up. So damn, you like homelessness and Nate Hochman go together.
Yeah.
It's everywhere I go. I just bring the homelessness problem with me. I must be bad luck.
You can't ever run for office because people will like smear you for that.
That's right. Or I could try to twist it into like a story of I've seen how bad homelessness is. Politicians get away.
We have a redemption story for you, and it's kind of a scenario. Government. Are you okay with me asking him the question?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So obviously, you've seen homelessness your whole life. You've been surrounded by it. You know how it affects communities. Would you make out with Hillary Clinton for 15 minutes full tongue to end homelessness?
Like everywhere?
At least in the three places you've been, like Colorado Springs, Portland, and DC, homelessness is done.
All right, let me get some parameters. So when you say end homelessness, this means like better mental health facilities for the guys who are like schizos. The other guys get jobs, like they stop being addicted to drugs.
I don't know.
I mean, at this,
it also leads into some policy like debates. Like it's not a simple solution here, but
right, because you can end homelessness better ways and worse ways. Like you could end homelessness just by like, there are bad ways to end homelessness. I won't speculate.
Like
but
euthanization would be bad, I think.
Yeah, I wasn't. You said it, not me. But I am not advocating for that. I'm saying specifically that that's a bad thing. But I guess at this point, it's like my patriotic obligation to make out with a hill dog for 15 minutes.
I would definitely do it.
I have to. Their lives on the line, you know.
Think about the vets.
Exactly. Yeah, I know these people served our country, and the least I can do is make out with Hill for 15 minutes. As much as the thought, kind of grosses me out.
Nate, so I know you were around for the COVID year, and so I lived in a retired veteran community for a week. We got evicted. It sucked because we were just like run and die in the backyard. But we at least we showed them that we were on their side. Like we threw up the "Don't Tread on Me" flag on the freaking garage, so that, they knew we were on their side. But dude, the whole street was littered with "Remember Benghazi" signs, and I was like, I didn't even know these people existed.
In the Springs.
In the Springs.
Huh. Yeah, that's interesting. So I never actually one of my regrets from CC is I didn't spend as much time in the community as I would have liked. Because it's actually a pretty conservative town still, although it's trending bluer. But yeah, that's the thing is because my senior year, it was just COVID and I was back home in Oregon. I didn't really get the living off campus situation, which is too bad because you get experiences like that, obviously, and you get a slight reprieve from the sort of liberal bubble on campus,
Yeah. So should we hop into the liberal arts? I don't know. Looking back on it, you're a year or two removed. I think a year actually. You're usually 1 year. But do you miss it? Do you think it was beneficial? How do you feel about the liberal arts overall now?
Well, liberal arts overall, I love. I mean, I think the ideal sort of liberal arts education is one of the great achievements of Western civilization, and America kind of perfected liberal arts education. So traditionally, the best thing about CC was the remnants of the old liberal arts. So I was a political philosophy major, and I got to read all the great books of Western literature and, debate the big sort of questions of the human condition and politics. All that was amazing. And I had really good teachers. And the political science department, at least the older professors, were a little less crazy than I think the rest of the humanities. There's one conservative professor left, but there are also a bunch of other old school liberals who weren't super woke. And they sort of liked the fact that I was an outspoken conservative. So I had a good time academically, a really good time. And I probably wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for the academics. My overall assessment of CC though is just I'm glad I'm out. I think it was beneficial in a lot of ways to be on campus where everyone had views that were diametrically opposed to mine and having to argue about with kids. And I also freely admit that I sort of made some mistakes in, I especially the last couple of years, became more and more outspoken about being a conservative. And at times I was kind of a dick about it because I was just angry at the campus. And I just was sort of fuck all these kids. I'm going to be as inflammatory as possible. And I wish I hadn't done that. But overall, it was it's obviously tough to sort of be someone who has those beliefs on campus. And, that at times is kind of miserable, right? Because it's a lot of kids just think you're a fascist or a racist or a sexist or whatever. And now it's funny because I'm in a conservative echo chamber where everyone around me agrees with me, which is a very weird culture shock from changing to CC. But overall, I'm grateful for my time at CC, particularly with the academics, and I'm also glad that I'm done and I'm out of there.
Yeah. Well, because I had a short time in the liberal arts, but I went to a liberal arts high school. I don't know if you're familiar with St. John's College in Annapolis.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. A lot of politicians end up going there for a master's degree or something like that. But it was kind of Socratic method, very liberal arts, discussion based. And the founders of St. John's College founded my high school as well. So my high school experience was very much CCS. So that's why I continued, I was either NESCAC schools or anything liberal arts was what I looked at. And I think just being able to be discussion based and like, I don't know, there's so many good parts about the liberal arts, and like I think you're right. The United States kind of like really capitalized on that education system. But then also like a lot of problems. Like one thing I was just thinking about, because I was reading an article that you were mentioned in, talking about like young radical intellectuals, and it referenced that you were from Portland, where liberals and like conservatives and people on the left both kind of like are roughing it in a lot of ways, like camping, fishing, and stuff. But at CC, it just felt like if you were doing those things, it somehow had to be related to liberalism.
Yeah. Well, the problem. Well, wait, as an aside, actually, was your high school on the same sort of like great books curriculum, the St. John's?
Yeah.
That's sick. Yeah, that's amazing. See, that's like the liberal arts at its best, right? This is what I'm saying is I think, especially like conservatives, people on the right are tempted now to just disavow the liberal arts because so many quote unquote liberal arts colleges have gone insane. But what we forget is like actually true liberal arts education is like one of the best parts of the American heritage and the Western heritage in general. Like it's really the great books, like the great works of political philosophy, they're amazing if you actually read them and you don't sort of read them through the lens of, critical race and gender theory or something. Like that is what like a true education is supposed to be. And it still exists if you seek it out at places like CC. It's just harder to find. But this is again, the problem with like the sort of progressive campus view now is that everything is political and everything must be political. And you have to view everything through like a politicized lens, which means like even things that you think would be apolitical, like going outside, have to be politicized, and you have to sort of categorize things in terms of race and gender. And if there isn't, the exact proportionate, representation of like white and black and non-binary and women, et cetera, in like an outdoor space, that means it is awful. And it also ruins the great books, right? Because if you're reading the Iliad or Socrates through the lens of like, there's no non-binary POC representation in Plato's The Republic or something, like you're completely missing the point of what it's about, which is supposed to be talking to something universal in the human condition. So that's a bummer. And that obviously like really has been a really poisonous sort of influence at places like CC, but it's not, there are still places where you can get like a real education. You just have to work for it. You're not going to get given it on a platter,
Right. Yeah. I was really lucky being able to do that because like, our professors were all former college professors from like all over the place. Like
that's sick.
Conservative colleges and universities, or like more liberal ones.
Yeah.
And we were really only reading like I remember we did ancient civ, and you had to take like one history course, one English course, and one philosophy, and you were only reading like original like primary source documents. And it was honestly like, it really, like, you went to a school, and I transferred to a state school, and it's amazing how well read like some kids come out of high school, and then others like have never heard of like Homer or Kafka or it's just
it is. I mean, that was my experience too. It's like I came from like a very sort of woke left-wing bougie private school in Portland, but it was also like, again, it was like one of these places where they still had like an emphasis on, Mark Twain and Kafka, it was someone who read in middle school, which is really weird. And like, and the sort of, the great literary works, and thinking about them in the sort of traditional liberal arts terms, right? Which is like, this is a commentary on aspects of what it means to be human that are universally recognizable to all of us, black, white, woman, man, whatever. So coming out of that, you already have like the base, and you can kind of like get into it in college, but you have a lot of kids coming out of like very broken schools, which A, they don't even teach kids how to do math anymore. And B, they've replaced, Mark Twain with like, Aztec incantations or something, which is something they're actually doing in California. And so kids, they have no base, they have no understanding of even how to approach learning. And they're also just, their view of education is one that's, I think, pretty broken in a lot of ways.
Right.
Yeah, and so going off that, actually, government had a question for you that I'll ask. But what do you think is the most useless major at a liberal arts school? Because I did my econ thesis on return on investment, so like it was fun. It was a fun econ thesis, but I also like I could have done a better job. I did a way better job in my history one, but but so like, I'm curious what you think about that a year removed.
So you did econ and history. Is that right?
I just turned in my history thesis yesterday. It was on like the gold standard in Nixon in 71.
That's sick. See, that's like, this is what I'm talking about, right? Like that's real history, right? And that's traditionally what like the study of history was. And it's amazing. Like this is like it's like a really important thing that is actually like what liberal arts is supposed to be about. So like you can do that. The problem is like, I don't know what the history department at CC is like, but a lot of, humanities departments like history, like the influence and the energy and the momentum is towards like
revisionism.
Yeah. Or like how the gold standard in the Nixon era, was discriminatory against non-binary Latinx immigrants, like stuff like that, right? Which is like, there is an interesting version of some of that stuff, but it just gets so reductionist and boring after a while.
I got lucky with Nixon because Nixon actually, not a lot of people knew this, but he was a pretty progressive president. He started affirmative action. He expanded Social Security. Yep. He did a lot of stuff with civil rights.
Created the EPA.
Yeah, created the EPA. So like the liberals, when they've come back and revisited Nixon, have been pretty fond of some of his policies. So I was able to like kind of work with some of those perspectives, obviously not agreeing with a lot. I agree with affirmative action, stuff like that, but like not agreeing with
you do agree with affirmative action?
Yeah.
We don't have to talk about that. I just, I want
to get into that because I'm on a basketball team. So like affirmative action directly affects the people that I'm closest with.
Sure.
And I don't mean that in that way. I've seen it, and I've seen it change people's like family trajectory. Like there's a kid coming in from Baltimore to our team next year whose dad's in jail, mom makes $32,000, and he's going to come, one, help the team win games at a program that I care dearly about, and two, he's going to have a chance to get educated for free. And I don't know what his grade situation is, but like that's amazing. Like if the liberal arts schools can do that, like I've seen, like we were talking a little bit about privilege and stuff. Like I'm happy that I go to a place that can support that, and to do it for a cause like helping the team win, I love.
But so it sounds like he partially got in because his value is basketball, right? Like, so he got in partially because he was good at basketball, which isn't quite
affirmative action in the basketball situation don't go hand in hand necessarily. Cause I think
because being good at sports actually helps you get in.
Yeah.
Right. So that's not the same thing as the problem with affirmative action. And there's a lot of data to back this up, is that it actually doesn't, this is true with a lot of sort of like progressive equity policies, is it doesn't actually remedy the substantive inequalities that it's aimed at remedying. So what it does is, because it basically takes race as the primary sort of, or not primary, as a consideration in deciding who gets in, what happens is you just have wealthy Black and Latino people who are already predisposed to get in because they're wealthy, get in and have like a better shot at getting into Harvard. So like the stories that you hear of like, the Black kid from Southside Chicago with like a single mom or something, like getting into Harvard, like it happens. And insofar as it does happen, maybe affirmative action helps, but frankly, like those kids will probably get in anyways if they're in that position, because they have exceptional stories regardless of their racial background. But what it substantively does most of the time is it just makes it easier for like wealthy Black kids and wealthy Latino kids to get in, and it discriminates against Asians, and it crowds out like poor white kids like in Appalachia who now have an even harder time getting in. So it in many ways, it just sort of perpetuates inequality and just sort of weirdly like racializes the elite. Like it just sort of it boosts people who are already members of the ruling class anyways, and it doesn't actually help the people that it is ostensibly intended to help, which is poor non-white Americans for the most part.
Yeah, and you touch on like so many things that I want to come back to, but like just being close to Baltimore, which it's funny because Maryland is a wealthy state. And Baltimore County, I think, is the wealthiest county. But if you look at the inner city of Baltimore and it's like public education, I think
it's awful.
I think if you take the two worst Baltimore public schools, 98% of those students don't pass the English or math proficiency tests.
Yep. It's awful.
No, but that's directly correlated to unions. Like these union teachers, they get locked up on like with tenure, and they just mail it in, and they don't they don't do what's best for the kid, and they don't teach them the basic skills. God forbid a public school system taught financial literacy. I think DeSantis is doing that. But those are the things that are going to set people up, and the public school system is committed to not doing those things.
Well, and they block kids and families from escaping failing school districts because they block charter school reforms, and by nature, like public schools and teachers unions are a monopoly, right? So they have a vested interest in making sure that they don't have to compete against other schools, and that families who are dissatisfied with their school district have the opportunity to go elsewhere. So they lock kids in, and they basically create a system where your zip code actually determines the quality of education you're going to get. And there's no incentive for failing public schools, really, which are boosted by powerful teachers unions, to become better because they don't have to compete, right? So it's like, there's nowhere else you can go. This is why charter school reforms are like one of the single biggest, you want to talk about like racial equality and racial justice, like charter school reforms are like one of the single biggest like things that we can actually do to substantively help poor, primarily non-white people in inner cities. And teacher unions are totally against it. And they spend the enormous amount of money they have. They're one of the biggest lobbying groups in the country when it comes to power and the amount of money they spend on elections. They use their enormous power, which often is they're the most powerful interest groups in a lot of these cities, to block those reforms from happening, which just traps these kids in a cycle of poverty. So it's hilarious because teacher unions sort of, present themselves as the champions of the undertrodden and the marginalized, and their entire political program is diametrically opposed to helping the people that they say they want to help.
Yeah. And it's funny because like stuff like that, I feel like is so bipartisan. Like, I feel like everyone
should be.
It should be. Like, I feel like everyone, but like people just aren't always getting the facts, like really understanding what's happening. Like, obviously, I think both sides like want better education for all like people in lower income areas, but it's just like a matter of like the solution is so like blended and obscure and like, I don't know.
Yeah, both sides say they want it, but the problem is that like the entire Democratic Party is like in the pocket of teacher unions. So you have a lot of Democratic Party politicians whose primary donor is teacher unions, and their number one agenda item is putting charter schools on the kill list. So they say that they want better education for like poor non-white kids, and their solution is just to throw more money at the teacher unions and at a broken system. When American spending on education has gone up every consecutive year for the past like 2 decades, and our education outcomes across the board have gone down for the past 2 decades. So obviously throwing more money at the broken system isn't going to work, but you have one party, which is in the pocket of a very powerful interest group, who has a vested interest in making sure that those reforms don't happen. So like, I don't really take a lot of elite Democrats at their word when they say that they actually want to help these kids, because they've created like this large sort of ideological framework to justify why they're against charter schools. And they cite sort of like studies from partisan think tanks that are also in the pockets of teacher unions. But they actually, when it comes down to it, when the rubber meets the road, they're completely against the stuff that we know actually helps these kids.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, I don't know. I think policy for me, because I grew up in like a very wealthy part of Annapolis, Maryland, like that was pretty liberal. So obviously like I'm a product of my environment, and most people are. And I know that changes like as you go to college and like learn more things. And I went to CC, and it honestly like pushed me, because I was like pretty far left when I came into my freshman year.
Same. Yeah.
And then it pushed me like to the more towards the middle, so I don't know. Just politics is weird.
That leads us into our next point, government too. What we were talking about with like LeBron and what he's doing with like the I Promise school. Like, Nate, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but like that's a charter school that every kid can go to Akron for free if they go through, and like LeBron's fully funding it. And we were just talking about like how those are the type of systems that actually do better. Like I had a BLM sticker on my practice jersey. And the people at BLM are crooks. Like, they haven't helped anyone. Like, all they did was buy waterfront properties, like, and live in California on the beach now. And like I'd rather give that money to Drake or LeBron. Like, how about Drake or LeBron just sets up like a fund to help these communities, and I'm all in. But it was so annoying this year because I was like, come on, like BLM's not helping anyone, and it's like they're probably helping the teachers unions more than they're helping communities.
Well, and they're taking sort of 6-figure speaking gigs at elite universities, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is like the grift of a lot of stuff. Like Ibram X. Kendi I don't know if you guys are familiar with him. He's sort of like the preeminent, public intellectual of like the sort of critical race stuff. And he accepts no less than 6 figures for like Zoom speaking appointments, for 45 minutes, right? Like he's making so much money, as are a lot of these guys. The woman who wrote White Fragility, which was like the big book of the BLM era, who's white, ironically, is making gajillions of dollars, right? Like same with BLM, right? They're buying second, third houses. And it's a total grift. Like, these guys are getting rich on the backs of the people that they say that they want to help. And you're not allowed to point that out because, what they do is like, it was hilarious. Like when the recent sort of controversy with the massive house that one of the Black Lives Matter founders bought came out, she like appropriated like the campus language of like putting Black lives in danger when people were criticizing her. She's like, people criticizing me are putting Black lives in danger. It's like, no, they're not, like you're just a grifter. It's like pretty obvious. This is like a non-racial point. Anyone who does that, regardless of the race or the cause, is a grifter. And it's too bad because it does distract from, substantive issues in the inner cities that could be helped with smart policymaking, but not by these people.
Right. And for me, like as a statement, I agree that Black Lives, like, I agree with the sentiment in some ways, the Black Lives Matter sentiment, but as it kind of became like more organizational and more like protest, it's like, I don't really understand how that's helping at all. It for me, it just like is exactly the same as like infographics, but more detrimental to like private property.
Yeah, I don't know anyone who disagrees with the statement that Black Lives Matter, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, I'm sure that there are some people who do, like racists exist.
Yeah. It's such a small amount of people.
Yeah, and no one who has any real position of power. Like the even like the phrase Black Lives Matter contains a lot of implications, which is that people, like systemically in America don't think Black Lives Matter, which I just see no evidence for. Now, there's an entire debate to be had about police brutality and police shootings. And I think a lot of the narrative that was presented by BLM is like not supported by the facts, but like that's a debate you can have. But the idea that anyone who's critical of Black Lives Matter doesn't think Black Lives Matter because that's their slogan is of course absurd.
Right.
Yeah. No, I actually, I agree. And I think that like at CC, they make you do these things like land acknowledgements. They make you do this Black Lives Matter thing. And I think a lot of it is white guilt. Like, I think a lot of it is the fact that they think back on their own life and like notice the lack of, I guess, diverse backgrounds in their own like background. But my biggest issue with BLM is that they go at the founding fathers. Like their target is Thomas Jefferson, or their target is like these great people in American history. And I can't get on board with that because I still think the Constitution is the greatest document ever written. And like, they really just hate the country. And I listened to an interview you did and you talked about this, and like, there's a hatred for the country in BLM, and I don't agree with it.
Yeah, it's in their founding documents. And the great irony, of course, is that all of these people are getting wildly rich off of the country that they're making money off of shitting on, right? Like, it's an amazing that a systemically racist country that hates Black and brown bodies is one in which grifters can buy like third multi-million-dollar houses on the beach in California, right? Like, or that where Ibram X. Kendi can charge 6 figures for a 45-minute lecture about how the country where he can charge 6 figures hates him, right? Like, it's just, the irony is obviously ridiculous. Like there are nuanced, important debates to be had about like the role of race in American history and like, where racism is an issue today. But this sort of totalizing narrative about America as this awful, evil, systemically racist place where no matter what, Black people can't get ahead is belied by the success of Black Lives Matter itself, right? Like every major institution in American life in the summer of 2020 was all in on Black Lives Matter, right? Like, all the massive foundations were writing huge checks to BLM and et cetera, right? Like, that to me does not look like a country that like hates Black lives and doesn't care about Black people, right? It looks like a country that's actually like racked with guilt about its history of racism. And in some ways, like America's obsessed with race in a way that like no other Western country is. I went to high school in Amsterdam for the first couple of years of high school. And one of the hilarious things about Western Europe is that they're way more racist than Americans, like way, way, way more racist. Like I was shocked because this was still when I was kind of like a lefty from Portland, Oregon. And I had the sort of like the popular like lefty idea of like Western European social democracies as like these bastions of like progressive democracy. And it's like the level of racism, just like casual, normal racism in those populations, which are much more heavily white than America. America is a much more racially diverse country, is nothing like anything you would ever hear in America, at least that I've heard, you know, coming from a lot of progressive places. And like one thing that they would always ask me is like, why are Americans so obsessed with race? Like they'd always say that. It's like, you guys, all you talk about is race and racism. Now, of course, like chattel slavery is something that was sort of unique to America. Like Europeans didn't have that. So that is like a difference in race, I think, precisely because this is such a really racially diverse country. Like race features more heavily in the American story than it does in largely white Western European countries. But it's also true that like from the beginning, like Americans have been obsessed with like racism, and it's been like the center of like our political debates. And that's, you know, like it's interesting. There's some polling to show when you ask the average American what they think the Black population of America is, it's like 30 or 40%, whereas the actual Black population is like 12%. That's because we talk about the African American experience so much. It's like so prominent. And to me, like there's an element of that that's honorable, which is like Americans really care about racism. It's something that we talk about a lot, but it also completely, you know, disproves the BLM line about how like this is like a neglected issue in America when it obviously isn't.
No, that's like a Shapiro line of thought. And it's like, we're a country that even while we were writing our founding documents, we were living in a world that wasn't that progressive yet, like across the world. Like no one was progressive. And even like Benjamin Franklin brought it up then. He's like, slavery is going to be the demise of our democracy. And then we fought a war for it because it was a sign of the times. Like people understood the realities of the world, and like the document got better. There was laws written in the document that permitted that from ever happening again. And it's like a coming of age story for, I think, a country. And they just want to tear it all down. Like, that's why I think we talk about it so much, because we literally fought a war over it.
Right. I mean, this is like one of the paradoxes of the founding, right? It's like America is not the first country where horrible oppression existed. It's not the first country where slavery existed, certainly. In fact, a lot of the African countries where we were taking slaves from had slaves themselves, and they had, you know, slavery existed there. But it is the first country where the existence of that racial systemic oppression was hypocritical, right? We were the first country where it was a contradiction, because of our founding documents, because of what we said in the Declaration of Independence, to have something like slavery, which is also why we were a country that was willing to sacrifice an entire generation of our young men in one of the bloodiest civil wars in world history to abolish slavery, because of the tension there, right? Like, so slavery was not unique to America. Racial oppression was not unique to America. But the fact that we actually had a founding that held us to a higher standard was unique to America, which is one of the sort of the reasons that the founding was such a genius, remarkable, you know, world historical event. I mean, even Thomas Jefferson, who was, you know, infamously a slaveholder, has a very striking line in his notes on Virginia, where he says, if there was a slave rebellion tomorrow, there's no argument from God that would side with us. He said, I tremble for my country when I realize that God is just. You know, that's a pretty striking line. He's saying, like, if the slaves like rose up and killed us tomorrow, that would be that they would be morally justified in doing so. So the founders are complicated people, right? Like, they existed in the time when slavery was institutionalized, when the sort of when it had been sort of a normal aspect of world history, when racial oppression was a normal aspect of world history, but they were also deeply uncomfortable with it, which is why they insisted on something like the line in the Declaration of Independence that said all men are created equal. And, you know, James Madison insisted on not including like a specific reference to slavery in the Constitution, because he didn't want to enshrine in the Constitution the idea that there could be property in men. That was a line from one of his letters. So that's the thing. Like, the founders owned slaves, and they accepted slavery as a sort of necessary compromise to form the Union. And that was not unique. But what was unique about them is the fact they were profoundly uncomfortable with it, and they understood it as a direct affront to the project they were engaged in, which is why America eventually abolished it, because of the founding, not despite it.
And that's a question we raise on this pod a lot, is like, when did like conservatives lose all touch of social life in the United States? Like, when did they lose touch of the social side of things? Like, if you go to an airport, like Becoming is the main book, like by Michelle Obama, or there's a Hillary book, like they have no social influence. And I think it's because the founding documents were founded on religion. And I think religion and conservatism go hand in hand, and religion's lost touch on society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also, I mean, that's like the result of a sort of sustained century-long progressive campaign where secular progressives who have a marked hostility to religion and to just sort of traditional conservative social mores have slowly but surely assumed control of every major institution in American life. So now, if you look at the landscape, the universities, one of our two major political parties, obviously, Silicon Valley, big tech companies, big business, Hollywood, the culture industry. I mean, you can go down the list. There's not a single sort of major institution in American life that isn't completely controlled by progressives and isn't completely unaccepting or intolerant of conservative opinions, particularly on the spicy social issues. So that, that is the landscape now, and conservatives are sort of on the outs in many ways.
Yeah, government. Do you want to say anything on that?
Sorry. So I missed a class today, and apparently, like, there was an exam. And
oh no!
I'm getting a lot of texts, but you know what? It's my last semester. I don't think that this class can affect my GPA at all. So I got sidetracked for a second.
Say you got COVID or something.
Yeah, honestly, like I've said that a few times.
You can get it more than once. So
I think I've had COVID 4 different times this semester.
You got a new variant.
But also, like, going back to like just slave trade, and there are a few things I want to say about that. I think the Enlightenment played a huge role in kind of like that timing with slavery, where America was this like nuanced, free, just country with like probably one of the greatest documents in the world that just got caught up in an era of slavery. And it's interesting because my mom was born in 1962, and that was when Saudi Arabia outlawed slavery. Like, African countries had dealt with slavery 800 years before with the Islamic slave trade. And then obviously, like, United States education has to dote on the Atlantic slave trade because it was so close to home. But I urge our followers to read up on the Arab Islam slave trade, because it's really like such a horrible and nasty, like, Trail of Tears-esque slave trade.
Native Americans owned African slaves. This is like another sort of contradiction. Do you guys know Ta-Nehisi Coates? He spoke at CC a few years ago.
No.
Yeah, okay. He wrote what did he write? Did he write 21?
He wrote The World and Me. He wrote like a bunch of famous Atlantic essays. He's sort of like one of the leading.
I read one of his Atlantic
writers.
essays on.
Yeah, they assign him in a lot of CC classes. He's sort of like one of the leading. He's like a relatively talented writer, just stylistically, but he's one of the leading sort of like woke, anti-racist writers. But this is hilarious. I was just looking this up to confirm it. He named his son after a West African chieftain who's sort of like a hero of like anti-imperialism, who owned slaves. Like he named his son after an African slaveholder who enslaved like his own people, or like members of like an opposing tribe, because which just like goes to show like slavery was everywhere. It was West African chieftain Samori Toure, who enslaved like hundreds, if not thousands, of Africans.
I actually read his The Case for Reparations. That's where I recognize.
Yeah, that's like probably his most famous essay. Yeah.
I have a trivia question for you guys. It may seem out of the blue, but I'll relate it back. What do you guys think was the first $1 trillion company? Like, first company to be valued at $1 trillion.
Was it American? I assume it was American, or was it not?
It was not.
Wasn't American.
No.
I don't know. Give me a hint.
Well, I know Apple was the first American one, but I don't know.
You got to tell us.
Okay.
It's Chinese?
No, it was the Dutch East India Company.
Oh yeah. Right.
Dude,
Well, this is like the hilarious thing too, is like Europeans love to rag on Americans for any number of things, including like racism. But the Dutch have yet to formally apologize for their role in the slave trade, which is
Same
like,
for Islam.
It was valued at $8.2 trillion. That is unbelievable.
And that was same for Islam. All of Asia just like pretends that they didn't participate in the slave trade, and they were like some of the biggest culprits. But
yeah, right. Like this was in the world until the American Revolution, really, and the Enlightenment. Like this was just the way of life. Like humans are like really brutal and awful to each other, and have been for most of human history. And we actually live in a time and in a place of enormous prosperity and peace and human rights compared to the vast swath of human history. But like up until relatively recently, it was just accepted that like conquest and destruction and might makes right are just the way of life. And if you conquered, if you were more powerful than like a neighboring country, you conquered them, you got to do whatever you wanted to them. Like the concept of human rights was not a thing.
That's very Hobbesian. It's like solitary.
Well, yeah, it is. I mean, Hobbes is sort of the basis of like the Anglo-American heritage when it comes to like thinking about this.
And you know what? Coming back full circle, that's why the liberal arts is great. Like you have to read Thomas Hobbes, and you have to read Locke, and you have to read all the human nature, guys. But human nature is brutish and short.
Yep. Yeah. Nasty, brutish, and short. And the basic insight of Hobbes was that like you don't have you can't have a perfect society, but like the number one role of society is rescuing us from the natural condition of man, which is that we're awful to each other, right? Like one of the basic insights of conservatism is like human nature is like not that great. And like, actually, if you don't have like restraints, we end up becoming pretty brutal pretty quickly. Like this is Lord of the Flies, right? Which is why conservatives look at a society like America, which is imperfect, of course, like all human societies are, and still have an enormous amount of gratitude for it, because we know how much worse things can get. And we know how much better things are here than they have been anywhere else in any period, in any place, in the history of the human race.
Yeah, like I thank my lucky stars every day I don't live in China. Like imagine if you lived.
You see what they're doing in Shanghai right now?
Yeah, imagine if you lived in that city, dude. Like,
yeah.
Wait.
That's what happens if you don't have, in the absence of like human freedom and a government that like actually places an emphasis on that they don't care.
It has to be written into law too. Like it has to be in your documents. And like, that's what I love about the military. The military doesn't swear to a president. The military swears to a document.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So alpha.
So alpha. It's actually
Constitution is alpha.
Yeah. The Constitution is alpha energy for sure.
Yeah. Francisco recently tweeted, like what specific words do you disagree with in the U.S. Constitution? I responded like freedom, liberty, and justice.
But do you know who has the most alpha energy out of any document?
Who?
The Bible.
Oh. Well, yeah. The Bible's definition of big dick energy.
Alpha. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is BDE, as the youth would call it.
Actually, the original, I did the fellowship at the Claremont Institute, which is like a conservative think tank that does a lot on like the Declaration and the Constitution last summer. And one of our professors, it's like a pretty famous like political philosophy professor at an Ivy League college, begins his lecture with the original Alpha Chad was George Washington, which is true. Like George Washington was the OG Alpha Chad, and like like America wouldn't have been founded without him, because this is like an interesting factor of history. Like he was adored by like the average American people, right? Like the founders needed to sort of whip up support among like normal Americans to actually ratify the Constitution, because there's a lot of skepticism among the different states about like joining together in one union. And the only reason they could is because everyone loved George Washington and trusted him, right? Like the other founders, they could make the intellectual arguments they wanted. They could write the Federalist Papers, which were published in newspapers, et cetera. But like the fact that like that it happened was because George Washington said it should happen. And everyone said, well, if George Washington says so too. Like there's a bunch of stories, like during the Revolutionary War, there was a period at the beginning where the Americans were losing pretty badly. The British Army was the most powerful army in the history of the world at that point. and like the revolutionary troops, like they hadn't gotten paid in like 5 months. They were getting fed like 1 meal a day. It was freezing. It was the winter. They were losing. They were all going to get court-martialed and like killed when they lost. And they were like on the verge of mutiny. Like they were planning a mutiny, and word got out to George Washington that this camp of American revolutionary soldiers was planning a mutiny. And he just walks into the camp with no guards, like no nothing, which again, like with soldiers who are planning a mutiny is like probably a bad idea generally. And he just like sits down and talks to the soldiers. Like he just talks to them, like he listens to their concerns, and he convinces them that like this is the right thing to do. Like that, again, not only is that major BDE, but that's also like only something that someone like George Washington could do, where you just talk a bunch of starving soldiers who are on the verge of death out of mutinying. And like, I don't think people understand like how much like the revolution and the founding, like it could have so easily not happened. And it only happened because of like this group of like men who were all geniuses, who were all came together at a very fortuitous time to do this. But it very easily could have gone a different way.
Well, also an interesting thing about George Washington is like he could have been president until he died.
That's right. They wanted him to be king.
And he was like, no, we need terms limits. That, and the fact that he was like a general too, and was so versed in politics and philosophy and like political philosophy, kind of like the intersection of the two, is absurd.
The
like,
world,
right.
The world was ready for a king. Like the world had never seen anything else, and they're like, okay, George Washington is the guy that should be our king, and he obviously took the role for 8 years, and he said, you know what, like we're better than this.
Wow. But this is again how like the founding was like a break with everything that had come before in a bunch of like remarkable ways, right? Like it was unprecedented for the sort of winning general to not become the monarch, right? Like that was just what was expected. And the fact that Washington did like go home to Mount Vernon in the end and had like the first peaceful transfer of power in like the history of Western civilization, like that was insane to people, right? Like people
that's
were
like kind of sexy.
You want to talk about privilege?
That's kind of, dude, that is sexy.
You want to talk about privilege? Privilege is having a dad that likes United States history to the point where he'll take you to Mount Vernon and he'll take you to DC and do the walk with you, and he'll talk about Reagan on long car rides. Like that's privilege in the United States. I would say that's like a version of it, at least.
Yeah, no, it's super important that like you raise your kids the same way, right? Especially now when like popular culture has turned so anti-American. Like it is so important to me that my kids like learn this stuff and they learn it the right way, you know, because like I'm never sending my kids to public school, first of all, because like it's
really
so
I am. I disagree with you with that. I am.
Interesting.
For high school, and not for like middle school and elementary schools, because I think like I at least was too immature for public school in middle school, but high school you need to go to public school. There's just
I completely disagree. I think that is a horrible take.
Yeah, I hope you're okay with like your 15-year-old daughter getting told that she's a boy.
Yeah, or getting stabbed,
which is what's going to happen.
No, okay. I'll send him to high school in like a very conservative state.
Doesn't matter. All the public schools. I have done a lot of reporting on like the education stuff because it's like a pretty important issue to me. And like you would be shocked at how woke deep red state public schools are, because the school boards are still controlled by the teacher unions and like woke left-wing activists. So there's like these crazy stories. I was talking to these parents in this like R+30 district in Kentucky, rural Kentucky, where their kids are reading the 1619 Project instead of American history.
Dude, and they have the worst education too in the South. Like
but partially because of the control of teacher unions there, right? So like even in the deep red areas, like the tentacles of like these progressive bureaucracies reach into them. And it's totally broken. Like it's these places, they don't teach kids anything important anymore. And instead they teach them like really awful, poisonous left-wing ideologies. And it's, I don't think it's a healthy place for kids to be. Maybe I'm sure there's some good public schools still. I'm just saying like, broadly speaking.
I will be sending my children to like a school that I went to pretty much. Like you are reading like the most important philosophical works ever.
Yep.
And that's all. You're not reading anything new.
Yep.
I mean, you can obviously, but like your beliefs are going to be formed off of like primary sources only.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
And I was able to.
Sorry, go.
No, go ahead. I'm just
success stories from public schools. Like there are still the kids who are raised conservative enough to like sift through all the narratives you're getting from the teachers and quote Ronald Reagan in your senior yearbook. And that's what I did. Why
take the risk? Like, why not just send those kids to a school where they're actually going to learn good stuff? Like, why make them go through that? What's the advantage?
Teach them about life. Like every single group that is in like the movies are at public schools. Like you got
okay, but if you want to learn about life though, make enough money to send your kids to a developing country where they can see other cultures.
I know.
Where they don't have to go to the public.
Like, isn't that the same thing? Public school. That's a big burden.
I see what you're saying. Like there's an argument obviously for like, I mean, the thing is if you send them to a public school, like in a nicer area anyways, it's also still going to be bougie rich kids. So I don't think it's
that's
that
true.
much of a difference. But if you want them to get like the grit and to actually like meet like normal working class kids, like definitely send them to a public school, I guess. It just is going to come at the cost of them learning anything for 4 years.
No, you don't learn anything in school.
You know how you can conquer that, Francisco? You make them work in the service industry.
That's what happened to me. So I went to like a bougie private high school with mostly rich kids, but I worked, I mean, I'm not saying like I'm a man of the people or anything, or like I'm sort of like more in touch with like the working class or anything, but like I worked construction summers in high school. And like that's something that you can do.
That's gonna turn you conservative. I'll tell you that much.
Nate,
yes,
Nate, you don't even know what you just did by bringing up construction, dude. We're very pro coal miners. Like we really think that boys need to become men by doing labor, physical labor.
Yeah, I think it's super important. And I worked on like a farm in rural New Hampshire in middle school. Like it sucked. Like it really is like I was not good at like manual labor, but like it's super important to do because otherwise you end up being kind of a pussy.
No, there's a part of me that doesn't want to go get a job and just go do manual labor and like do the pod or just write on the side and stuff like that. Cause I respect it. Like, and I respect people there. Obviously I know that like privilege to me is the fact that like, I don't need to go do that. Because my parents supported me enough through my educational experience to allow me to put myself in a position where I could work behind a desk. But part of me is like, damn, like that. One, it's a good workout. And two, like you like doing it for a year, I don't see like the worst thing in the world about that. I think it would build so much character.
Oh, what? It's like I think it's important to do in some capacity, even if you don't end up doing it like for your sort of lifetime career.
Yeah.
Hey, Nate, we have a quote for you, and we just want to hear your take on this. Okay. This was a tweet. I think this is still the best tweet of all time, and this was tweeted about like 3 years ago, and I still No, I was in high school. This was like 6 years ago. Okay. Libertarianism is astrology for men.
Yeah, I've heard the variation on that is the stock market is astrology for me, which I think is also is similar. Yeah, I mean, I think libertarianism is pretty silly. Sorry if you guys are libertarians.
No, but we're actually we have an interest group we support, and we think they would be libertarian. We're curious what your take on it is. But you have an interest group you support that would be libertarian. Do you think the midget community would be libertarian? We've kind of come to that conclusion.
Oh, no. Francisco is pro-midget. I'm anti-midget.
What's the pitch? What's the pitch on them being libertarians? Why would they be libertarians?
Why wouldn't they be?
Yeah, they don't know. Do you know what it is? Oh, I got the pitch. All right. So we remember that Gary Johnson clip?
The driver's license. Yeah. Driver's license one. And then what was the line? It was what am I going to need next? A license to toast my toast in a toaster.
Yeah. Like, dude, that's the thing. Like, the midgets can't get driver's license, and it seems like libertarians are very against driver's license.
Their enemy, the midgets are the enemy of the state in a lot of ways.
Yeah, Francisco, we might. Well, Nate, just if you don't know, we love to spread misinformation on this show.
Big misinformation pod.
Yeah,
I like it.
But I'm pretty sure that midgets can probably drive.
Why can't I mean, maybe you could just make an argument for free market innovation. Why can't they just make cars for midgets? Like midget sized cars. That's like kind of what zip cars are, right? Like not quite, but like I actually don't understand why you couldn't. Well, I don't know shit about cars, but I understand why you couldn't just have a car where like the pedals are
higher.
I guess midgets legs are really small.
Yeah,
so,
but I think they could do.
I don't think they could drive. I really don't think they could drive.
You'd have to be, maybe it's just irresponsible. Well, this is why libertarianism is irresponsible. Maybe midgets just shouldn't drive.
Well, also,
and that's what we were talking about, at least too. We're like, at least like the woke left, like in their own twisted way, they really do think they're helping human rights. Like when they post that infographic, they think they are part of the solution, not the problem. But like the libertarians just like want midgets to be able to drive. Like
that's right.
The causes they're behind just like don't make much sense.
Well, you also so I know a lot of libertarians just being in DC policy circles and being on the right, like libertarians and conservatives kind of mix sometimes, even though there's a lot of suspicion between the two groups. And
I think they're so different.
Oh, they're very, very different. They're more different than I think a lot of people think. But like, so libertarians talk a lot about like free markets, limited government, constitutional liberties, et cetera. You know, in the abstract, obviously I'm for all that, but you actually listen to what gets them animated, like the shit they really care about. Like it's very telling when you listen to any person from a political ideology talk, like the stuff that like really gets them going is like what they're really about. And it's like decriminalizing drugs and porn. That's really what it's about. It's like I want to be able to like smoke crack in the public, and I want to be able to like watch like porn on demand. Right. Like that's
child porn usually too. All these
guys for some libertarians,
Nate, you're really anti-porn, right? I feel like I've seen some stuff you've done on that.
Yeah, I think it should be
that
banned.
Brandy Love stuff, right?
Oh yeah. That was a little while ago. That was ridiculous. Like a conservative youth conference had like a porn star, you know, like posting pictures from it, and her like pinned tweet is like her nude, you know, not just normal nude, but like, you know, pussy out and everything. But in general, like, I just think that like degeneracy is, you know, not good for society and particularly not good for kids. There's some crazy stats now that like, if you have a kid, it is more likely than not that he sees hardcore pornography before he hits puberty. And what we know, there's like increasing evidence to show that like porn really fucks up, you know, like your sexual development, particularly if you are exposed to it at an earlier age, particularly in young men. Like, you know, erectile dysfunction long-term, lower rates of sexual satisfaction, more proneness to like violence in sexual relationships, lower rates of relationship satisfaction, et cetera. Like it really like messes with young men's minds, particularly young men. And young women are obviously hurt by that indirectly. So it's bad, and it's particularly bad for kids. And like, you know, I think like the libertarian argument for like unrestricted porn on demand is like bogus. Like it actually is completely unrelated to like the Constitution, you know.
It's a weird hill to die on as well, but I honestly couldn't agree more with that. Like I honestly, like, I can't lie, I probably watched porn semi recently. If we're an open podcast.
Mea culpa. Yeah.
But really I shouldn't. And for like, there's so many reasons. I mean, just what it does to you. It's just not worth it. And I'm pretty sure it lowers your T.
Yep. Yeah. Abusive porn does. And look, like, again, like anything, like it's in moderation, it's probably fine. Like, I think it's better if you don't, but like,
12-year-olds don't know how to moderate.
Well, right. Well, there's that. And also like, it's a bigger deal for them when like they're still developing, but it's like a mostly full grown man. Like if you watch porn from time to time, it's not going to like mess with you. But if you watch porn, like more often than you actually have like regular sex with like an actual like breathing human woman, like it starts to like really mess up like the way that your mind and body think about sex and sexuality. And it's also just, it's just bad for you. Like it's, you know, it's degeneracy in general. So like, it's bad.
That goes along with technology too. Like I think our generation is going to be like uniquely exposed to that because of how easy it was to access porn, like growing up. Like, like you're at a 4th grade sleepover and like this kid that has an older brother, like knows how to find it. And then you know, and then you know how to find it for the rest of your life. And that's just like Google what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to make my kids have Playboy magazines and they're going to have
old school. Return to tradition.
You guys see that on the
conservative traditionalist.
You see that on the Kanye doc? He like goes in and he just buys like a Playboy. Like,
I do remember that scene.
I was watching with my dad. That was kind of funny. I like giggled a little bit.
That was a great, that was a great documentary.
I didn't watch it. Needs to figure out his life a little bit more. I heard it was great, though.
I love Kanye.
No, you really are exposed to the fact that he has issues. Like he has mental issues and like
bipolar.
He has forever. Like you watch the documentary, you're like, okay, this guy wasn't normal 20 years ago. Or
but that's also why he's a genius.
Yeah, exactly.
Most geniuses are also insane. Like that's why they're
Elon Musk. Elon Musk
is a
highly
crazy
functioning autistic.
Yeah, and sometimes not so highly functioning. Like,
and also,
do you remember like when the whole like Thai cave, like the kids stuck in the Thai cave a couple years ago, like the divers,
and they all made it out.
They all made it out, right? But Musk sort of inserted himself into the controversy and was proposing these like crazy, like nonsense, like technological responses where he's going to send in like special like cave diving equipment or something. And some cave diver who's like on the scene was like, yeah, this is like bullshit. And he like accused him of being a pedophile. People forget about this now because like Musk is, now he's like doing the Twitter thing and I like support that. I think he's doing like a lot of great stuff. But like cave diver pedophile. He like accused like a cave diver.
Dude, you're gonna be on like a no-fly list if you look that up.
No. This was top line news. Elon Musk calls British diver Thai cave rescue pedo in baseless attack because he wanted to send in like a submarine or something.
I remember that, and it's tough. But with the whole Twitter thing, like you do you, Elon.
Oh, but, no, I think it's great. Like, dude, I totally support it.
Wait, Nate, you see the hate speech index? Did you see that?
No. What's that?
There's like a hate speech index published by some German guy that like a former employee at Twitter, and like Naval was like in like the top like quartile. Like obviously Naval is not spreading hate speech. Naval's telling you to like invest and like get involved in like passive income.
Yeah. Well, it just goes to show like hate speech doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah.
It's not a real thing. Yeah.
Oh, well, also I read something really interesting on like why you should never censor hate speech is because then you won't actually know who racist people are.
It's a good point too.
An interesting take, like, because if you just censor everything, then you won't be able to like know who is racist or not. And I think
it's also just like what is hate speech, right? Like if you listen to like the people who are calling for hate speech ban, like define what hate speech is, you realize pretty quickly like it's literally anything that they like disagree with on like any cultural issue, right? Like
Well, believe it or not, I'm a registered Democrat in the state of Maryland. It's a blue state, so like it's gonna win. But we actually have a
Republican governor. Yeah,
Larry Hogan, who has presidential hopes, but he's too short and fat. So
well, he also just is like he would run as like the anti-Trump candidate, which is like pointless. Yeah. Like he's gonna get like 3% of the vote. Yeah, I mean he's good for Maryland. He's good for Maryland. Like he's a blue state Republican, and he's like the best Republicans could hope for.
Yeah, people don't really. I mean, he's fine. I have no feelings towards him.
Nate, I'm glad he's governor of Maryland. Like, I think he's like way better than like the Democratic alternative. No offense if you're a registered Democrat, but like it's silly for him to think that he.
I voted for Hogan.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. Yeah.
Nate, we have a bold prediction on this pod, and we wonder what's your take on it?
Oh
yeah. Let's hear it.
DNC needs a candidate. Like in the betting odds, Michelle Obama is like third. Like Hillary's like maybe second or something. Like Kamala obviously can't win.
Where's The Rock?
We think Mitt Romney is going to be the DNC nominee.
Yeah.
No, I mean like it's hilarious, right? Because Mitt Romney is like anti-Trump, you have a lot of Democrats like begging him to run. But the second that
conservative.
Yeah, he's still like relatively conservative. He actually hasn't gone completely off the deep end on like the Never Trump stuff. Like you have some Never Trump Republicans who have just stopped being conservatives, and like Romney's still like on policy. Like, I mean, he's not as conservative as I'd like him to be, but he's like conservative. Like and as like all the Democrats who desperately want him to run just want him to run because they prefer him to like Trump or like a Trumpy candidate. But like if he actually ran as the alternative to a Democrat, like none of them would vote for it. Like they'd all vote for a Democrat.
No, but it's Obama's fourth term that they're voting for. Like Obama got 2 terms, then then Trump like blew it. But I love Trump, but like whatever. And then Joe Biden is president technically, but Obama is in his 3rd term. Like, and I think everyone knows that. And if Michelle is the nominee, that's Obama's 4th term. And I don't like the trajectory of Obama's terms. They're getting worse and worse. Like every term is worse for Obama. And this one's his worst one yet.
Dude, his second term wasn't like the worst thing.
No, dude, he was awful.
It was pretty bad. He really took the brakes off on the second one, right? Like everyone kind of, there's like conservatives were always sort of like suspicious of this, but it was like during the first term and during the campaign, the 2008 campaign, it was always like a suspicion, but it was like basically Obama sort of rhetorically would posture as like a moderate, like there are no red states, there are no blue states, like et cetera, et cetera. And like the mask really came off. I mean, it came off in the first term, but it really came off in the second term when he didn't have to win another election. Like, he ran in 2008 as like the unifier candidate, where he's like, there's no red states, there are no blue states, et cetera. And then the second he got into office with a Democratic supermajority and Republicans were like raising concerns about what he was doing, he gives his press conference and he goes, elections have consequences, right? It's like very different tone, and in the second term, like he was, like waging war on like Catholic charities who didn't want to pay for like abortions, like, the Title IX stuff, like the culture war stuff, he just totally doubled down on.
Yeah, I think,
yeah.
Well, I think when you compare like President Trump and Obama, obviously culturally they're like ways and ways and ways away. But I think in terms of like the economy, in a general sense, Republicans and Democrats haven't been that far off. Like obviously their policies, like their beliefs differ a good amount, but like their actions and what they do, like what you've seen in terms of Obama's economy and Trump's economy, with the pandemic, it was tough, but like they experienced almost identical growth, and like in a general sense, unemployment was steadily declining in Obama's terms, and I think it slowed in its second term.
We haven't had a good economic president since Bill Clinton. I mean that honestly. And Bill Clinton made some mistakes too. Like NAFTA has set us back, but like what these presidents have done to the budget is actually like disrespectful to the American citizens. Like,
Trump and Obama both didn't care.
The debt stuff is obviously awful.
Like, so that's a bill that we're gonna pay. So whatever they did, they literally just they made it worse for now. Like when you're in a peacetime economy, which we relatively were, like obviously they did the Afghanistan war, Iraq war, but you got to start paying back the deficit, and no one addressed it. So like whatever they did economically, it's going to set us back in the future. So like I don't consider any of the presidents we've had since Clinton a good economic president.
I mean, if you're measuring it specifically on debt, then yeah, I think like in terms of like Trump's economic record, in terms of like how the economy was doing for the average American, working class wages went up for the first time in decades under Trump. And some of that has to do with like the fact that he's restricting low skilled immigration, which meant that you had a tighter labor market, but also like he got the economy going with deregulation, tax cuts, like that stuff does help. It's diminishing returns. Right.
I actually liked his work with factories.
Yeah. I mean, I think like Trump, the sort of like
Trump was sick in terms of growth. Like Trump knows how to grow business, and like it's because he's dealt with regulation his whole life. He knows which ones are harmful, and he used that expertise to put Americans to work, and he did a good job of it.
You know what I dislike though in American politics is anytime I really believe that presidents, like for the most part, have the smallest impact on the stock market. And I really think that like anytime people trying to argue like, oh, Obama's presidency saw like strong stock market growth, and same for Trump, like Trump stocks. The pandemic is so tough to like be able to like quantify economic growth and like a lot of other factors, but I just really don't think that the stock market has much to do with like who's in office.
No, although the stock market would fluctuate based on Trump tweets, so
that's true.
Yeah,
and Elon tweets. Like when like that's why institutional finance like has like is skeptical towards Elon. Not really. They're kind of really on his side for this stuff, at least the conservatives. But like he would really mess some stuff up with like the SEC filings, and like he would go against some of like the normal like code of ethics when it came to like stocks and the publicly traded companies. And so like my dad, who works in finance, like he did not like Elon for a while because he would make the stock market fluctuate.
Yeah.
Well, I don't like that politicians are beating all of the big funds. Like any big investment fund, a lot of big politicians, Democrat and Republican, are like beating out the market.
Politicians should not be allowed to invest unless they give their money and don't know where it goes. I firmly believe that.
Yeah. And I think like some of the legislation around like banning the stock trading in Congress makes a lot of sense, and it's bipartisan. Like you've got Josh Hawley and like some progressives championing it. Like that just seems like a common ethics reform.
Yeah, I like that a lot. It's because at the end of the day, they're public servants.
They're supposed to be.
Yeah. And you know what? I know we've been pivoting like crazy, but like I am pretty anti-Bernie, but what I do really like about Bernie is I feel like he's a public servant.
Yeah. No, I have a soft spot for Bernie. Like I think like his economic ideas are sort of wacky and crazy and would be bad for the country. But like the message, I think that he's like, I mean, I have some like populist sympathies in general. Like this is why I was sympathetic to a lot of like Trump's message. Like,
yeah, he's very populist, I feel like.
Yeah, like there's, and like, Trump and Bernie actually, I mean, Trump has actually said this. He was saying this when like Bernie was running in the 2020 primary. Like he's like, Bernie and I agree on a lot when it comes to like trade and immigration. Now, Bernie is like totally pivoted on immigration in 2020 because his campaign was run by a bunch of like woke activists. But like he was to the right of George Bush on immigration in like the 2000s. Like there's this crazy Lou Dobbs clip that you guys should Google of Bernie on Lou Dobbs in 2007 when George Bush was pushing amnesty and was saying like, this is bad for workers, which it is. Like, mass low skilled immigration is bad for workers. That's why wages started going up when Trump was restricting immigration. But like in 2016, he called open borders a Koch brothers scheme, which it also is. Like the Koch brothers are big on open borders. So like he kind of like lost his way a little bit on some of that stuff. But like he used to be like an old school labor Democrat in some ways, where he was like actually pro worker and he was consistent on it. And I respect the hell out of that.
You know what we should leak? And I know like because you're close to the Hill, maybe you could do this for us. We should leak Bernie's going to be Trump's pick for vice president.
Wouldn't that be hilarious? Make everyone's brains melt.
I think that'd be awesome. I would vote for that in a second.
It's a winning ticket. No, I
do see some crossover with like populist Republicans and like sort of old school populist progressives like Bernie, like Josh Hawley.
They're not that far off.
Nate,
on some stuff, yeah.
We've got two like tickets that you can leak as well. We've got the
Mitt Romney,
the DeSantis Tucker ticket.
That would be amazing.
And then we've got the Trump Candace Owens ticket.
That would be less amazing.
Who wins that?
I would be less stoked on that.
I don't think Tucker will run.
No, I don't think he will either. Why would he? Like, he's more powerful as like the number one talk show host.
Yeah.
Like all Republicans are terrified of Tucker, like when he goes after them, because he's like so powerful. Like he can like sort of single-handedly like ruin Republicans' careers, or definitely like make their jobs much more difficult by just doing.
Well, he's kind of like molded a new kind of Republican.
Yeah. No, he's become much more populist in recent years. He used to work like people forget, like he got his start like in the early 2000s, I think, at the Cato Institute, which is like the big libertarian think tank, and now he's like firmly anti-libertarian.
Well, the Cato Institute is massive in DC, right?
Yeah, they're very powerful, and they've also kind of gone crazy. Like they've like leaned into like the sort of worst kind of libertarianism. They used to be better, but now it's like a lot of libertarians, like especially at least like DC Beltway libertarians, have kind of gone woke, because like libertarians, like their entire like identity is like not being conservatives, right? Like they want to be like one of the good ones who like don't have all of the nasty conservative views on gender and race and immigration and stuff like that. So what that does is it gives a lot of these guys brain worms, which is like they end up like taking positions that aren't even libertarian because they just want to distinguish themselves from conservatives. And that's what's happening at Cato. So you got a lot of Cato types who are like pretty woke on cultural issues now. They just like low taxes,
Yeah. My thing is like, if you're not like, because I'm not a trans person, why would I die on that hill? Like, I know this is, I just don't care. Like I know a lot of my liberal friends that are straight men or women that like are just like trying to die on the hill of like being ultra woke for gender identity. How are you so affiliated with this?
Well, I think like not being trans isn't like an argument in and of itself for caring, because like you should care about other people. Like I care about like policies that affect other people that don't necessarily affect me. Yeah. But like I think the broader question is like whether or not the mainstreaming of the idea that like gender can be divorced from biological sex is good for the country. And I think it isn't.
Do you know how I know it's bad?
How?
Because
tell us.
I go to liberal arts school, and like liberal arts schools are small, so you see people pretty often, and I run into a lot of people. So in this one situation, I don't want to run into anyone. I go to the bathroom. It happens to be a gender neutral bathroom. You go in, whatever, do your business, come out, and you're just face to face with this girl that you talk to a lot. And that feels wrong. And that's how I know it's wrong, because it's not natural.
If something like feels wrong, though, I don't know if you can say it's wrong just because of a feeling.
Yeah.
You know?
I think that like, so I don't think like, again, like, yeah, that in and of itself is like the sort of political argument for it, but it does get to, I think, like actual deeper issues when it comes to like breaking down sex-based barriers. And you have seen like what happens when you actually do, like, to your point about like the fact that like you have like these restrooms now where they're accessible, not based on biological sex. Like the darker like effect of that is like in California now, male prisoners can transfer to female prisons if they say that they're transgender. And there's been like a, you know, like in the UK, for example, like there's been a huge spate. Yeah, there's been a huge spate of sexual assaults in female prisons because you have male prisoners who have not undergone any transition, aren't on puberty blockers, haven't gotten a surgery, but they say they identify as females because they'd rather be in women's prison, and then they rape, right? Like, and that like I mean, hold on, let me pull up like the statistic. But like the United Kingdom, they've had these policies longer than we have. Like we're just starting to do it. So like they're kind of like a preview for what's going to happen here. But like trans women, biological men who are in female prisons UK, they're like exponentially higher rape rates because this is like people taking advantage of this. Transgender prisoners in the UK are 5 times more likely to commit sexual assaults than biological females in those prisons. At women's jails. So this is like an actual problem. Like it's a big deal, and it's starting to happen in blue states like California. We've already had stories of rapes in these prisons, and like at the school level too. Like Loudoun County in Virginia, there's a big controversy where a boy who said he was transgender, wearing a dress, walked into a girl's restroom and like raped like a freshman in high school or something. And the school district tried to cover it up because it was not like it sort of ran contrary to the narrative. And the dad of the girl who got raped, the 15-year-old girl, is pissed, understandably, because the school district isn't doing anything about it. They're covering it up. And he shows up at the school, like being like, what the hell? Like my daughter just got raped, like demanding answers. And they call the cops on the dad and they arrest him. And the prosecutor, who's also woke in the district, like goes after the dad and tries to get him put in jail and get him shut up. Like, so this is like the sort of authoritarian element of all this stuff, which is that dissent is not allowed. But it starts at the breakdown of like sex-based barriers in traditionally female spaces like bathrooms and prisons, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Well, my thing is like, if I were to murder someone and I got 25 to life, I would 100% say that I'm a trans woman.
Of course.
Why wouldn't I? I want to spit game. I'm not, obviously, we're very
well, yeah. Or I would just say like, I mean, for me, it's like also it's because I like am not like a jacked, like if I went to like a prison, like a federal
I'd be someone's bitch.
Yeah, I'd be someone's bitch. I'd get the shit kicked out of me. I might get killed. You know, like if I go to a women's prison, you know, it's just a much more hospitable environment.
Yeah.
No, women are great, dude. I
love women.
Yeah. This is a pro-woman podcast.
Yeah. No, very pro-woman.
Pro child trafficking and pro women.
Nate, want to hear a funny story though?
Yeah.
So I play pickup basketball, and I like to get a workout there because like it's skill I have. I played basketball my whole life. It's the best workout known to man. I don't like getting on the treadmill. Mm-hmm. So we're playing. There's 11 people in the gym, 10 guys, 1 girl. So I just point over to the girl. I'm like, hey, you got next. I'm like, we're gonna play real quick. You have next. And then. So whatever, play the game. She obviously was a little upset. I could have handled it better, admittedly. I didn't really know what to say, but I wanted to say it. And the game was good too, so it worked out. And then, so I'm at Tony's, and her and her 4 friends all roll up to me and just start going in. And they're just like, you're a sexist, misogynist. Like, what are you to say that she can't guard anyone in that game? And like, why didn't you shoot for it? All this stuff. And they're yelling, and I'm just sitting there. I'm just taking it. And like, while I'm sitting there, I'm like the craziest part is I love women so dearly, but like a lot of the stuff I would say about women right now would make them even more upset. So I was like, I just have to shut up. And Like, oh
yeah, it's the best thing to do in that scenario.
It got so bad, and then I'm just like, you know what, like, ladies, like, you guys are right. I'm like, I'm a sexist, I'm a misogynist. Like, can you please just like leave me alone? I was like, I'm just at the bar. I'm trying to drink some beers with my friends. Like, can you just stop yelling at me? Like, can you please like just? I'm like, we're gonna get nothing out of this conversation.
Yeah. Well, actually, pre CC, I actually had like big dreams in politics. Like, I was so infatuated with politics in high school, and like for a long time, I was like, I want to be a state representative or like a congressman or something. And then I went to CC, and I just like, it made me lose all of that hope of like.
That's funny. It's going to CC is what made me interested in politics.
Really?
Partially because everything was so insane. It's like, this is
it turned me off for that reason. I don't know, but
yeah, I don't want to be a politician at all. I just like talking about politics.
Well, also another thing that kind of like turned me off was like at CC, if you ever try and have a discussion about politics, it like, for me at least, I know this is personal experience, it never really went anywhere because I knew I was never going to change their mind because like people are so stuck in their ways. And a lot of the shit that they were saying to me was definitely not going to change my mind. So I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, that's unfortunately, that's like the campus echo chamber. It enforces that, right? Because it's like kids are told over and over again that they're right about everything and they don't have to, question any of their beliefs, which leads to this idea that like anyone who holds different beliefs is like obviously wrong and isn't even worth listening to or engaging with, particularly on like the cultural issues, which are like I think at CC it's acceptable to say like you want lower taxes, like kids will disagree with you, but they'll like be like, okay. But if you say, I think abortion is the taking of a human life, kids are going to react, I think, much more strongly. Or I think like men and women exist as distinct biological categories and are different. And that you can't just like wake up one day and decide that you're no longer what your body is. You're going to get in trouble. Now, I got in trouble.
Well,
I'll be right back. I'm going to get
No, Nate. I have to head out. Actually, you and government could stay on, but I just want to say thank you for.
Okay. Well, yeah. I also got to do work.
Sorry we kept you on for a little while.
No, you're good. I didn't mean to cut it off right now. I just
Oh, no worries.
No problem at all. Also, like, we do this a lot, so if you ever want to come back on, like, we got a lot.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, when you guys get going, I'm happy to come back on anytime. It's fun.
For sure. Yeah, 100%. Maybe I'll see you at Mission.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, shoot me a text or something. We'll get a beer.
Sounds good. All right. Well, see you guys. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Yeah, bye.
Government. Peace out, man.
Peace. Cisco.